Well, hello, hello. Listen, I'm just jumping on here for a minute because I wanted to talk to you about Camp Mystic. This is not going to be a very long live. I just wanted to. There's a little more information that's coming out about Camp Mystic and what they are attempting to do. Camp Mystic, that is the flood that happened in Texas where children and where people's lives were lost. There is still one more person that is still missing. There's a little girl still missing from Camp Mystic and the flooding that happened there. Now, if you will remember, let's just kind of catch up on what exactly happened at Camp Mystic. It was a very expensive, exclusive camp for girls. It was this happened in October. Let me get back over here. So this went let's go back over where 27 girls died. That one of them is still missing. Just a lot of things went on there. They're trying to rebuild this camp now. And I understand that they want to rebuild it. But here's the thing, that's been halted. And it should have been halted. They do need to preserve the evidence from the flooding and the lives lost and really get to the bottom of what happened here. They are planning to rebuild, but they're not planning to move the camp. The camp had buildings built in the flood zone, which is exactly why this happened, which is terrible and was avoidable. You should the reason why you have a flood zone is so things like this don't happen. I understand that it had not flood. They said, "Oh, it's in this floodplain or it's in that floodplain." Well, let's talk about what the floodplain is and what that actually means. Okay, so let me bring that up for just a second, and then we'll come back to this story. So when it says, "Oh, well, that's a floodplain, you can't build there," what does that mean? Well, let's talk about what that means. It means this: um, the FEMA flood map and what it does. All right, so a floodplain or bottomlands is an area of land adjacent to a river. Its floodplains stretch from the banks of a river channel to the base of an enclosing valley and experience flooding during periods of high discharge of water. The soils usually consist of clays, silts, sands, and gravels deposited during the floods. Because of regular flooding, floodplains frequently have high soil fertility. Since nutrients are deposited with the floodwaters, this can encourage farming. Some important agricultural regions, such as the Nile and the Mississippi River basins, heavily exploit floodplains. Okay, agricultural and urban regions have developed near or on floodplains to take advantage of the rich soil and fresh water. However, and this is where the problem comes, the risk of inundation has led to increasing efforts on controlling flooding. So, we're going to talk about Camp Mystic and exactly where it sits within the floodplain. Okay, hold on a second. Pull this up. I hope everybody's having a wonderful day. It's beautiful here in Texas today. Okay, all right. Now, according to, and this is according to the FEMA, this is on the map. Let me show it to you. I'm going to pull this up. Let me put it on over here so we can actually see it, and that way you'll better be able to understand it. So, um, Camp Mystic. I saw my iPad, but I can't not just show it over here because it's different anyway. Camp Mystic in the floodplain. I can pull this map up for you so I can show you what we're talking about. Um, it is okay. Ooh, I gotta do it this way. Put the word map there and pull right up, right? Okay. Now, here we go. My dogs are wandering around outside like, come on, mama, come outside, come outside. I'm like, no, I'm gonna do this instead. Now, let me pull this up. Hang on a minute. I want the map. I don't want to see that. Hang on. I'm trying to get actually just the map. I don't want to show y'all everything else. Um, Let me do a little snippet over here and cut this picture out and get this map. Capture screen area. Here we go. All right, this will take care of that. Now, I'm going to save this. And it's going to be Camp Mystic. All right. Here we go. Now, I'm going to save this over here so I can pull it up over here now. Let's go ahead and grab this right now. Here we go. All right, now let me share my screen so I can show you what I'm talking about because many of those cabins were built in that floodplain. Hang on, guys.
Much of Camp Mystic was in a special flood hazard.
Oh, I had to mute because my dog started barking. So let me show you this. I did not intend to play all of this, but it's kind of important because it talks about the floodplain, Camp Mystic, and it shows the actual map, which is important. That's why we're talking about this. So let me get this started. This is going to be full credit to, um, hang on a second. Well, damn it, where did it go? Hang on. To Channel 8, KHOU News. Okay, this is going to be KHOU News, full credit. Hang on. 11. Actually, I think I'm going to have to go pull it from just a moment. I'll tell you why I can't do it from Bing because that is considered third party and YouTube gets upset. So let's pull it from over here. It'll be just fine. We'll pull it this way. Okay, so channel 11. Oh, come on. I'm having a hard time this afternoon. KHOU Mystic. All right, hang on a second. Let's go, let's go. All right. Now, why is this giving me such a hard time? Okay, Mystic Report, KHOU TV. 11. Here we go. All right, here we go. Nope. Hang on a minute. I want to find where they're talking about the map itself. Okay, hang on just a second, guys. I feel so unprepared. Hang on. Damn it. Okay. Whoop, this will take care of it right here. All right, now we can play this one. Just a moment. Okay, there we go. Why can't I find my snow? Mm, I need this media thing. Come on. I need my little dot. No, that's not right. That's not right. There we go. Okay. The problem is, they asked them to change this. I'm sorry, I had to find my dots. I don't want to get a copyright strike. We need to take care of that first. The problem is, they've asked them to take these things out. They're looking at it because these buildings were not permanent buildings. They were temporary buildings, basically, because they were not built on a slab. They were, like they were movable, right? Most of them. So that created sort of a problem here, and so FEMA was said, okay, well, we'll take that out. We won't require you to buy flood insurance on those buildings. But the problem is they were still there. Okay, there's just a little bit of issue here about what was actually supposed to be, what should have had insurance, but what did not have flood insurance. That's what we're going to talk about. So let me let this play for a minute. Okay, here we go. Again, this is going to be KHOU. Absolutely. Okay, why is it not moving? Why is it just stuck like that? All right, here we go. Now let me share the screen properly because I had it on the wrong screen. And here we go. You don't want to get a third party share whatever because that's not good. Here we go. You can't fight those really. Okay, so here we go. Let's see. Oh, now why did it not share? Mm-hmm. All right.
To help in the relief efforts. Scan the QR code right there on your screen to make a tax-deductible donation.
Now that I've got
You
all
should
that
know
straightened out, I
all
can
of the
go back
money,
and get the other
100%,
one.
will go directly to
All
local
right, hold on just a
nonprofits
second
in
now.
flood-impacted areas.
Stop. Okay, that really I want to show you this map over here. This is what I want you to
New
see.
summer camp
This is going
safety
to
rules.
be from News 4 San Antonio. Okay, here we go. Let me make this bigger. News 4 San Antonio. It's going to actually show you the map, and that's what I want you to see is the map. There we go. All right. Come on.
Were signed into law Friday following the Hill Country flooding that killed 27 young girls. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Mandy Noel.
I'm Jonathan
Hi.
Martinez. The law includes a requirement that cabins be located away from floodplains, which some camps opposed.
The News 4 ITN's Jay Avila obtained FEMA records showing why Camp Mystic's buildings
This is what I
were
wanted to
removed
talk
from
about.
the floodplain map years before the disaster.
The records include this map of the floodplain around
Okay,
the
watch this
Guadalupe
carefully.
River, the dark blue area here.
Right
and the
here's the
numbers
camp.
represent
Okay.
buildings and cabins.
Okay. You'll notice all of these little numbers right here that are in this dark blue area. Right here. Look at all of those. Those were directly in the flood zone. They were not they should not have been there. You should not build in flood zones like this, and they should have had flood insurance on it. But for whatever reason, this is what we're discussing is they were still there. They had told there was some kind of controversy about they can't sell them. We need to, those really aren't there anymore. They're kind of temporary buildings, but they were still there. That's kind of the problem. So I'm gonna let this play while I pull some other information up. Thank you so much. And just bear with me for a moment. I'm a little bit frazzled right this minute. I couldn't get things to work. Hang on.
At Camp Mystic. Some of them were removed from the floodplain because their floors were elevated enough to be considered safe in a 100-year flood.
In
But
an
not all the
exclusive
way.
interview with NBC's Today Show, some of the parents who lost children at Camp Mystic pushed for the new laws.
It became very, very clear that this wasn't an accident. This was complacency, and it is 100% preventable.
Right here to the governor's mansion.
A key provision of the new laws?
Require cabins to be located away from floodplains.
In a statement, Camp Mystic.
What they had done was you saw that building. So what you saw was a portion of the building on a slab far enough to be away from the what's considered the floodplain or the flood zone because it was not on the flood zone. But you also have buildings that were directly in the flood zone. You had buildings that were partially in the flood zone. It was unsafe and it was 100% preventable. 100%. Because here's the thing that people are not talking about when it comes to this area of Texas and this flood. It wasn't the first time. I talked about that once before in my other live about Camp Mystic. See, there had been flooding there before as well. In fact, we're going to go back to that now, and I'm going to discuss that with you, and then we'll finish watching this. So, the question is, how many times has it flooded right there? Okay, Mystic floods. In fact, there were people that died there before. Okay. On July 4th, okay, this was, let me get this over here. Okay, come on, open up. Okay, it's not wanting to, it doesn't. Okay. In 1987, folks, in 1987, there was a huge flood as well of that same river. So um, there are people who have talked about it before. In fact, hang on a minute. Let me go back over here and let's see. I want to find, there was a whole story about somebody talking about this. They survived. This happened in 1987, and they survived it. So this wasn't new. You know, it's just terrible. So let me get this over here. Hang on a minute. It's pulling up the wrong story. It's the prior floods that we're talking about, where other people died before. Busloads of camps kids died before. So they knew this was always an issue. Why was it still like that? I don't understand it. So Camp Mystic in Hunt, Texas has a long history of severe flooding dating back to 1932, people. In 1932, they started having floods there. 1951, 1978, 1985, 1987, and then July the 4th of 2025. That is a lot of flooding, known flooding for that area, okay? In 1932, which was the early history of the camp, they had a flash flooding that swept away several cabins, with campers evacuating by canoe. On May 15th in 1951, torrential rains caused waters to rise 10 to 12 feet. Now, nobody died there, but again, it was flooding 10 to 12 feet. In August of 1978, there was a tropical storm that caused severe damage, with water almost reaching the dining hall stairs and sweeping away cars. This is all at Camp Mystic, guys. This is not close to Camp Mystic. This is Camp Mystic. This is right here in black and white. You can find it on Google. This is where I found it. How many times this has happened at Camp Mystic and how much of a danger they knew it was. But they never did anything to fix the problem. In 1987, a major storm resulted in a 29-foot, okay, listen carefully, 29 feet rise. That's huge. Of the river, killing 10 teenagers at a nearby camp, a disaster that was at the time cited as a reason for greater flood awareness in that region. So there's a camp there's a Camp Mystic, there's other camps on that river, and they're just kind of next to each other. But in July of 1987, now knowing that it rose 29 feet when a major flooding happened, and it killed 10 teenagers from the camp next door. Okay, so they know it's a problem. They've known it's a problem. They've known their buildings were in the flood zone, and they did nothing to change that. That is a problem. Okay. So then we have July the 4th of 2025, and the 1,000 this is what's crazy about this. This particular property set in the 1,000-year flood event. What? Occurred, dropping massive amounts of water on Kerr County, destroying cabins and 27 deaths. Despite these reoccurring events, the camp passed state inspections. Now, the state inspects this. Passed state inspections for years leading up to this 2025 disaster, which was deemed a unique and unprecedented event by some. It's not unique, it's not unprecedented, because there have been many floods right there in that area, repeated over and over. It's right here in black and white. I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 before the 2025 incident. So that's not unique, all right? Now, some newspaper articles about the previous floodings. Now, it just shocks me to no end that they knew this was a possibility. They'd seen this happen before, and just a few feet down the river, or not even a mile away, basically, there's another camp where 10 people had died from that flood, and your buildings are right there, and you did nothing. What can we learn about this? This is what's important about this. Now, this summer has been one of the most flood-impacted areas on record, with states such as Illinois, Texas, New Mexico, and New York, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Wisconsin, all experiencing a 70% increase in reports of flash flooding through the mid-July compared to the 10-year history. So, the most consequential of the summer's flood events was the Texas flash flood on the Guadalupe River that devastated Camp Mystic and resulted in over 138 deaths. It wasn't just the kids camping. There was a bunch of deaths from this one flash flood incident. So 138 people and $18 billion in damages was the aftermath of this flooding. Okay. The ASFPM fielded more than 24 media inquiries on topics ranging from flood mapping and pre-disaster mitigation to warning systems and steps parents can take to ensure their kiddos are safety. They're safe at these camps. The regulatory gaps. There was some gaps, and this is part of the problem. The whole thing needs to be looked at, investigated, and answers need to come. The camp needs to be I understand you want to rebuild your property, but you need to make it safe. You need to move everything out of the flood area. It's expensive, but it's an expensive camp. We know that. So here's the situation. There are regulatory gaps leaving camps and campgrounds vulnerable. This is what's happened here. The NFIP's minimum standards and most community floodplain regulations only deal with development like, turning a shovel full of dirt, and typically not temporary residential or overnight uses. Like a temporary building does not have to have flood insurance, and it's not considered to be dangerous if that's in the floodplain. Okay, but when you have campers living or staying in these temporary type buildings, it is dangerous. Okay, so residential overnight uses in the floodplain like camping, especially if building isn't being constructed or improved. A zoning code may provide some use requirements or restrictions, although emergency action plans, the EAPs, are best practices and most counties have local emergency management departments to provide technical assistance. EAPs are not usually required. While there may be either state or local standards and inspections or licensures requirements through the health departments, any requirement for emergency procedures from a public health perspective are typically generic. Okay. Now, if they exist at all, inspections tend to be check the box type inspections, and these it's just not enough. Okay, this needs to stop. It needs to be a focused action. You need to post that the building you're staying is set in a flood zone. Because here's the thing I want to ask, and I'm sure the parents, I don't know if I'm going to say I don't know or I'm not sure, but if my child was going to a place like that, and I knew it was on the river like that, and I knew that area was prone to flooding, do you think I would ask if my camper was safe in that building? Is that building in the flood zone? Do you have warning? I mean, I would have asked a lot of questions that I think people just took for granted because we often do take things for granted when we see it every day. Well, it must be safe. It's still open. It must be safe. It was inspected. It passed some state requirements. And so in our mind, we think, okay, it's safe. But the requirements are not enough is the problem. That's what I'm saying. The requirements should have been stricter when you're dealing with camps, public camps, providing spaces, providing temporary housing for these people, for these children to stay. So it seems that the local floodplain management ordinances could be improved to specifically address campgrounds, including requiring permits and inspections for operations and prohibiting the construction of new overnight cabins in the highest risk areas like floodways. And for consistency purposes, state model ordinances could have clarified this language better. That's what I'm saying. It could have been, it should have never happened. And it's kind of like, it's not just God that caused the flooding. This is kind of a breakdown between the state, the city, the laws, and the enforcement of such things. That's what I'm going to say. Let me take a drink. Okay, so there are advanced warnings that only work when it's paired with the appropriate actions. That's also a problem. Flood warnings, whether they be from sirens or from the National Weather System's alerts, are limited in effectiveness if you don't have a specific EAP to accompany it. A siren or weather radio is not by itself an effective flood warning system. Okay? An effective system requires specific instructions, practice procedures, to take action after the warning. And this especially is important when the time is limited, such as a flash flood situation. This was absolutely a flash flood situation. Okay, now, there's been a lot of social science research and new innovations on warning systems in the past 25 years. The integrated public alert and warning systems, which is the One PAWS, PAWS, was created in 2006. It was established by Executive Order number 13407, which was signed on June 26 of 2006. This order mandated that creation of more effective, reliable, and comprehensive systems for delivering public alerts and warnings, and FEMA was designated as the lead agency for developing this system in 2004. There was the warning, okay? The warning lexicon was created in 2023, and it is a tool designed to help risk communications write effective warning messages, particularly for wireless emergency alerts, by providing a standardized set of statements about hazards, their impacts, and the recommended protective actions. It is based on research and theoretical framework called the Warning Response Model, which identifies 5 elements, the 5 key elements of effective warning messages. You have hazard, impacts, location, guidance, and time. Time is the most valuable because with the proper amount of time for your warning, people can get out. Okay? Time is the most essential. So, the lexicon aims to improve the clarity, speed, and effectiveness of warning messages by offering a common language and actionable statements for various hazards. Okay, so there it says pages 37 through 39 of this lexicon supplemental information has a warning message framework for flash floods. A great back that should have been read and should have been noted. Okay, the warning lexicon and the creation and evolution of flood warnings can be found there. Also, the DHS Science and Technology The DHS Science and Technology Directorate has had an effort since 2016 focusing on the development and the commercialization of low-cost flood sensors. That is so important. A flood sensor could have told people, wake up and get out. Just like you have a smoke alarm, same thing. It could have helped, could have made a difference. A fact sheet. Okay, so there's a fact sheet on that. And I would show it, but I can only be on for a little bit. I don't have much time today to do this. But I wanted to talk about it because it's important. I'm glad to see that they've stopped them from disturbing the evidence, because this needs to be, let's take care of it one time. Let's not have another situation where we've got 138 lives lost from a flash flood where a warning system or warnings could have helped these people get out. Okay, so the EAPs for flash flooding in camps and campgrounds are non-existent or insufficient. That's the most important statement of the day. Non-efficient or non-existent. Several EAPs for campgrounds or RV parks. One trend was okay, here's what they've been doing. So one trend was a tendency for flash floods to be lumped in with severe weather events. Flash flooding as a hazard must be broken out from generic severe weather events and needs to have an automatic trigger and specific evacuation routes and points. Okay, for example, the evacuation or shelter point for a tornado, the lowest part of a building, for example, will save you, right? Will get you killed, but if you're in the lowest point of a building during a flash flood, you're going to die. It's way different and on the extreme ends about the flash floods versus the tornado. And an informal review done on several EAPs for campgrounds and RV parks. While some features of an effective EAP are present, most of them don't have any. There's nothing posted at all. It's camp at your own risk, right? So there should be a standard for every campground, just like there is for your tornado warnings. And there's an underutilized exercise approach and this is core to emergency management. This needs to happen. It would seem to be helpful here, either to develop or improve EAPs and/or facilities better awareness of the flood hazard and an EAP. It is a tabletop exercise. It's a discussion based on simulation used to evaluate and improve emergency response plans. It involves facilitated discussions where participants analyze hypothetical hazard scenarios, identify potential problems, and develop solutions, all within a low-stress informal environment. So talk about it before it happens, not after it happens. Now, I'm going to let this play through, and then we'll talk about something else that has to do with this and the safety. Here we go. Okay, let's play.
Said it supported the legislation, but some other Kerr County camps sent a letter to lawmakers saying a 100-year floodplain prohibition would require us to rebuild cabins while also not being able to operate and generate income. Camp Waldemar, Vista Camps, and Camp Stewart did not respond to our interview request, but State Rep Brian Harrison says they could be forced to spend millions rebuilding cabins that didn't flood.
This is basically just a land grab, okay? What they've done is put in these obscene provisions that will make it impossible for most of these, especially small and mid-sized camps, to...
Is it obscene? Is it obscene to try to save lives so we don't have another 138 people dead from a flash flooding? Is that obscene? That's the question, right? No, it's not obscene. I understand his concern, but I know there's a way that it can be worked through and people's lives can be saved, and it can be safe to go camping again. Here we go.
continue to function.
We reached out to a floodplain expert to help explain why FEMA removed some of Camp Mystic's buildings from the floodplain more than 10 years ago. Jimmy Harless is emergency management coordinator for Gonzales County and was formerly floodplain manager for Guadalupe County.
The cabins that were removed through the FEMA process were correctly removed, but that doesn't say that they're not going to get 20 foot of water in them.
Harless says FEMA sets what's called a base flood elevation, and all structures in the floodplain must be higher than that, or they have to purchase flood insurance. Records show the floors of all Camp Mystic's cabins were higher than that base flood elevation.
Okay, so all the floors were higher than the base flood elevation. But that is because they did not want to pay for flood insurance, because flood insurance is expensive. However, flood insurance could have, if they would have met the safety rules, these people may still be alive. That's what I'm going to say. That should have been left in the floodplain. They should have had to pay for flood insurance. They should not have built these cabins right there. But let's keep going.
The Bubble Inn, where 14 girls were swept away. Its floor was listed at 1,845 feet, 9 feet above the requirement, which was 1,836 feet. Harless says the 1,000-year flood in July should cause camps to prepare for much more than a 100-year flood.
I think that's going to put an extreme burden on the camps that have been in existence for years. But how do you define burden compared to human life?
That's my question.
Camp Mystic said its planning and procedures will reflect the catastrophic 1,000-year weather event that occurred on July 4th, including never having campers return to cabins that had floodwaters inside them. For the News 4.
Okay, well, that's all fine and good, but because they're not going to return to those. But are you going to rebuild the cabins that need to be rebuilt in the same areas? Are you tearing them down? What are you doing here to prevent this from happening again? And I think that FEMA, the rules should, I don't think that because you built your foundation 9 inches higher, that's not enough. That's just not enough. There's another problem with the warning systems as well. The water rose so fast there that had everybody been awake, because this happened in the middle of the night, right? Had everybody been awake, would people have gotten out? You have to remember there's still one child unaccounted for. One family still does not have their loved one to lay to rest. That's horrible. Okay. Now I'm going to turn this off over here. Okay. Let's quit sharing our screen, and we're going to talk about something. We're going to talk about, flooding in general, and the seriousness that. And having this warning system, the proper warning system. So what we know from this letter over here that I'm looking at, there is no warning system. There's nothing at these campsites. There's no requirement that they post notices about how to evacuate due to flooding. Okay, which is the same thing with these campsites for these girls for Camp Mystic. They need to have some kind of plan, and it needs to be posted, and it needs to meet some criteria based on state laws that meets with FEMA, the state of Texas, the federal flood, and federally. It all needs to work together. You can't have one. Hang on a minute. We can't have one campground doing one thing and another campground doing something else. It should be a standard. There should be standardized rules that go with flooding and camping and the warning systems, because that's the problem here. You know, you need an effective plan. Now, these EAPs must be exercised with all responsible staff and campers so that it becomes an automatic in case of an unexpected middle of the night event. Based on numerous articles, it seems that the staff at Camp Mystic and the nearby Camp Lejeune were not familiar with an EAP. So they did not know what it was, right? And they did not have one in place. How are you helping 100 campers if you have no plan of action that's standardized for everybody to follow when something like this happens? That's a problem, right? And I know that they say it was freak. It was a 1,000 year thing. No, but we've already proved it was not a 1,000 year thing. Remember, those 5 other dates back there talk about it. And the camp down the road, 10 people had died from that camp already. So it's the same thing, but on a bigger, but bigger, because it was 138 people and it was 27 campers. But it's the whole county was 138. So think about that for a second. Based on the numerous articles, okay, so they're talking about that, they weren't familiar with an EAP. And what about the campers? By exercising the plan with campers, you not only make the camp safer, but you create an opportunity to teach those curious young minds a little bit about flooding and floodplain management. Because it's just like, it should be just part of the rules. You have an emergency evacuation plan. It should have been part of the rules that were discussed when these campers first arrived, and you discuss, okay, this is the plan, these are the rules, and everybody say, okay, I understand, I acknowledge. Take them through the evacuation process. Do a mock evacuation so everybody knows what to do. That should have happened, but apparently, because they don't have a plan, that was not done. Okay. One of the other things about this is, and it's very underutilized, is that core to emergency management. Either develop or improve EAPs and or facilitate better awareness of flood hazards in EAPs. Okay, a lot of people don't even think about flooding ever. We need some rain. We just need some rain. But if you don't really think about the disaster, the cost, and flooding, and how it affects families that lose everything because they don't have flood insurance. And I know insurance is a whole nother show for a whole nother day, because a lot of people find that stuff to be a ripoff. I'm going to say it like that, a ripoff. It's not that it's a ripoff. It's just that the insurance companies don't want to pay for anything. They want you to they want you to bear all the responsibility of doing everything the right way so that they never have to pay, but you're expected to have it because you need to save. You need to be able to rebuild the home that's insured. Okay. Anyway, we'll talk about insurance another day. So here's another thing. Parents. Okay. Parents are almost entirely unaware of a camp's flood risk or whether a camp has effective emergency plans. And I'm going to say that's probably true in this camp, at this camp. They participated in a little study, and they did several interviews discussing the point, including this one from the NPR. It is clear that not only should parents be more educated on emergency plans by asking campgrounds the right questions, but it would prompt the campground owners to ensure that their EAPs are updated and that there's awareness of them, and that every staffer and camper has seen it, has participated in a mock flood evacuation, so they know what to do. It's just a tragedy that could have came out differently. It didn't need to happen. And Camp Mystic is an old camp. It's been there a long time. I understand that moving everything out of that flood zone would be super expensive. It would. But I think that the federal government needs to step in. Now, let me just say this, and this is just my thought on it. It's not important, whatever. Okay, just like the federal government steps in on some things and they say, we're going to help you fix a problem, I think that they need to help them fix the problem. As long as if you're a tax-paying, if you're paying taxes to run your business, and you're paying for flood insurance, all these, I just think there needs to be a way that the government can step in and say, okay, we're going to help you. We're going to help you by removing these buildings out of that flood zone, and we're going to find a way to help you manage to rebuild. It was some kind of interest-free money or something, so that we don't ever have this problem again, and the camp can still maintain its business and it doesn't have to close down. Because a lot of these camps are and Camp Mystic is not the only one. A lot of camps are in these little flood zones and things. A lot of RV parks are in these flood zones because they're not, they're temporary buildings. They're not there all the time. It's just that it was perceived to be not an issue, but however, it is a huge issue, right? We know that now. Here's another thing. Let's talk about this for a minute. Camp Mystic's owner warned of floods for decades. Then the river killed him. Listen to this, guys. This is a real story, okay? Dick Eastland warned for decades about the hidden dangers of that beautiful but volatile Guadalupe River. Okay, he was warned. He was running his family's youth camp alongside its banks. Eastland saw flood damages from Camp Mystic again and again. His pregnant wife was airlifted to a hospital while the camp in Central Texas was cut off by floodwaters. He successfully pushed for new flood warning systems after 10 children at a nearby camp was swept away to their deaths in 1987, and in recent years served on the board of the local river authority and supported the renewed efforts to improve warnings on the Guadalupe River. The river is beautiful, Eastland told Austin American-Statesman, but you have to respect it, and that's true. After 27 people were killed at Camp Mystic in this flooding, along with Eastland himself, the owner of the camp himself also died during this flood, while he tried to rescue some of his campers. So he was well aware that this was a hazardous situation, and the sad thing, it took his life too. So he fought for new. He actually tried, or he worked with. We worked with people for decades, knowing that this was a problem, knowing that this could actually take the lives of young campers. He saw it happen before, but he still did nothing to move those camps, those buildings, out of that flood zone. What do you think about that? About a decade after it was installed, the warning systems that Eastland had championed in the late 80s it just became outdated and old. It needed to be updated more often. But I understand that the warning systems were not available for him to update with, or were they? That's what I don't know. I'm going to look into that. The River Authority shut it down in 1999, saying it was unreliable with some of the system stations not reporting. Okay, so what does that mean? For 19 years, they had a system, and then all of a sudden it was shut down, and they had no system? Yet periodic attempts to adopt a more modern flood monitoring system, including one with warning sirens that might have alerted campers that week, failed to gain traction. It was always stalled by low budgets, some local opposition, and the lack of state support. So here we are. Think about this. Had the state stepped in to say, listen, you've got to have some kind of warning system, it all could have been avoided. But we're always on hindsight's 2020, right? We know that. But it's just sad to understand that even the owner of the camp died. He knew it was a problem. He was well aware of the danger. Okay? He was well aware. At Camp Mystic, meanwhile, several of the cabins that were hit hardest in the flooding were in an area identified by the federal government as the highest risk locations from the Guadalupe River. Even as the camp built new cabins in less risky flood zones elsewhere on its property, nothing was done to relocate those buildings in the most dangerous areas. Camp officials might not have been aware of the flood risk when they first built the cabins. Before the county even had a flood map, says this Anna Servet. Her name is Anna Sarah Labette, and she's from the University of California. Okay, she says officials should have realized they were in an area of severe hazard. Eastland has been praised as a hero for his efforts to save campers and remembered as a beloved figure by generations who spent their summers in the idyllic Riverside Refuge. His legacy is less clear as public stewards of the sometimes deadly river they ultimately took his life. If it wasn't going to die, okay, he goes, if he wasn't going to die of natural causes, this was the only other way, saving the girls that he so loved and cared for. This is what his grandson had to say about him. This was in an Instagram tribute. Although he no longer walks this earth, his impact will never fade away. This is from his grandson talking about him, how he passed away in the river saving some children. The history of floods. This is very important. Camp Mystic has had a long history with flooding, going back to just a few years after it was established 99 years ago. So this camp was there for 99 years. That's amazing. In 1932, the floodwaters swept away several cabins at the camp and led campers to evacuate across the river by canoe. This is according to an article in the Abilene Daily Reporter. A counselor told the Austin American-Statesman at the time that the campers might have drowned if we had gone out in front. Oh, wait a minute. Austin American-Statesman at the time that the campers might have drowned if we had gone out the front door and walked face into a sheet of water. Well, what do you mean by that? Okay, this statement doesn't make a lot of sense. I'll reread this little paragraph. In 1932, floodwaters swept away several cabins at the camp and led to campers to evacuate across the river by canoe. This is according to an article in the Abilene Daily Reporter. A counselor told the Austin American-Statesman at that time that the campers might have drowned if we had gone out the front door and walked face into the sheet of water. In 1978, an article in the Carabel Mountain Sun reported that Camp Mystic was the most severely damaged of local summer camps affected by a flood that year. A separate article reported that 5 Camp Mystic counselors had their automobiles swept into the Guadalupe River by floodwaters that year. So see, this is an ongoing problem. It wasn't new. Nobody did anything. Okay? And in 1985, Eastland's wife, Tweety, who was then pregnant with their 4th child, had to be airlifted from Camp Mystic to a hospital due to floodwaters. They were trapped at Camp Mystic. One of the region's most devastating floods until the 4th of July disaster was in 1987, when 10 children attending a different camp in the area were killed by floodwaters during the rushed evacuation. Eastland, who at the time was serving on the board of the Upper Guadalupe River Authority, which manages the river, pushed for new flood warning systems. In a newspaper article, it described a computer-powered system that would lead to automatic alerts if water levels on the river rose beyond a set limit. That should have happened. Yes, it might have been pricey, but it would have saved lives many times. Okay, many times. The proposal was delayed, but eventually created a 21. Okay, this is kind of an interesting statement. The proposal was delayed, but officials eventually created a system of 21 gauges up and down the Guadalupe and its tributaries. So they had gauges. Why did they not go off? Even as Eastland voiced pride in the new system, he was quick to remind the public the Guadalupe's deadly power. Okay. I'm sure there will be other drownings, Eastland said. This was in 1990. This is an interview that he had with Austin American-Statesman. People don't heed the warnings. Well, you got to have a warning to heed it. If you're not warned, you can't do anything. But if you're running a camp full of children and you hear a warning, you're going to heed that warning. You're responsible for all those children left in your care. Okay. A lack of progress is blamed. There's also a lack of progress, and I will agree there is a lack of progress. In the following years, the early flood warning system that Eastland had advocated for and was once considered state-of-the-art started to suffer problems. In April of 1998, the company that maintained the system closed its doors without notice, and the gauge system soon stopped functioning because of lack of maintenance. And this is from the Kerrville Daily Times. In February of 1999, the River Authority shut the system down because it had become unreliable, with some of the system stations not reporting information at all. and board members worried about liability concerns that the system would send the false signals, according to an article in the Times. Well, a false signal is better than no signal, and at the point when you had this disaster, there was no warning, period. Nothing about how much water was rising so quickly in that river. Sounds like a bunch of damned excuses, doesn't it? Because it does to me. So, oh boy. But okay, so then she says, grant applications for this system were denied by, let's see, Kerr County officials, along with the River Authority that Eastland periodically served on, worked to change that over the last decade, searching for funding for a flood warning system that included more river gauges and a network of sirens. Okay, so, but they found themselves struggling to overcome funding deficits and opposition from some skeptical residents. Grant applications for this system were denied by the state in 2016, 2017, and the authority later decided not to pursue a separate grant after realizing they would only cover 5% of the system's cost. Around the same time, Camp Mystic was embarking on an expansion project. So they knew there was a problem. They had some type of system. The company that ran it folded, bankrupt, whatever. So then there was no system. They're starting to look for other systems, but realized it was only going to be funded 5% by the state. The rest was on the owners. Okay, so that's where it became a financial problem. It was a financial burden. Okay. At the same time, Camp Mystic was embarking on this expansion project as the number of girls attending the camp grew over the years, leading to a wait list. That's right, there's a huge wait list. Leading to the wait list to get into the summer. The camp built more than a dozen new cabins further south on the Guadalupe River alongside the smaller ones on Cypress Creek. Some of those cabins were located in the area that the federal government had determined had a 1% chance of flooding each year, which would have required officials to get special approval from the county government to build there. But the risk was even higher at some of Camp Mystic's cabins closest to the Guadalupe, several of which were located inside the river's regulatory floodways. That's a huge red flag. Regulatory floodway. Those are the areas that flood first and are the most dangerous. Now, that's according to the flood maps. Those cabins had been around for decades. Historical aerial photos show apparently before FEMA first did the flood zone maps for that were developed. I mean, these cabins were already there. I mean, this is a 99-year-old camp. Dealing with pre-existing structures like these inside a risky flood zone is especially challenging, per the experts. When they did the construction of the recent buildings, they should have seen the FEMA maps. Okay? She says, was a window of opportunity where camp officials could have realized their decades-old dorms were in the high-hazard zones and acted on it then. Camp Mystic could have relocated those buildings to higher ground or just turned them into structures for recreational activities and made sure that the campers were safer and sleeping in safe areas, she says. Kerr County should move past the blame game that comes from any disaster and focus on the lessons that could be learned for protecting people from floods and going forward. Well, yeah, they should move past the blame game, but the problem is you have a group of parents and other people, well, you have especially the parents of the children who passed away. They are going to go after Camp Mystic. They are going to file charges. They are going to file lawsuits because their children's lives were taken, and this could have been avoided. This is how this is going to be a huge, if it goes to a civil trial, it's going to be huge. Where are you going to get fair and impartial juries for a trial like this? You know? Okay, so let's go back over here. It's not clear whether Eastland personally grappled with a high-risk flood zone running through his own campground, but in recent years, he was part of a continued effort for an improved flood warning going forward. So he knew about it, he was concerned, he's done some things about it, but he never moved any of the buildings. He never moved the buildings. It's not, and it goes, Eastland returned to the River Authorities Board in 2022 after being appointed by Texas Governor Greg Abbott. After the previous setbacks, the board this year moved forward with a proposal to create a new centralized dashboard of rainfall, river depth, and other data sources to support local flood monitoring and emergency responses. In April, the River Authority had voted to hire a firm to develop the data system, and it was planned to begin work this month. That was postponed after the flooding. So they talked about it, made plans. So after Eastland was found dead, tributes have rolled from his colleagues, community members, and former campers whose lives he had touched over the years. Although I'm devastated, I can't say I'm surprised that you sacrificed your life with the hopes of someone else being saved. This is what people are saying about him. But I'm not going to read all of those. But it's just interesting that they knew about it. The bottom line is they knew about it. They did some things about it, but they didn't do enough about it. You know, it's so tragic. Hang on just a second, because I want to show y'all something else in a minute. Hang on. Whoops. Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay. Here we go. Pull this back up over here. All right. So, I mean, yeah. Let's do this. Think about this, though. You think, I know everybody's thinking, this camp had been there for 99 years. Yeah, something serious. You know, another camp had lost some kids once before, but that was, 10 years ago or whatever. It only happens once every 100 years. I mean, that kind of thing. But really, the Camp Mystic disaster, this is what it is, a disaster. But I wanted to talk about just tragedies like the one at Camp Mystic don't just happen. See, they're shaped by choices. Now, we've seen that. We've read that. We just saw that they had talked about it, made some kind of preparations, but not enough. Talked about moving buildings, talked about turning buildings into something else, but they didn't do it. They just never did it, right? It's choices about safety, preparation, communications, and responsibility. When those choices fall, families pay the price. What happened here was preventable, and the fight for answers isn't over. That's right, because there's a huge lawsuit coming. As the courts continue to sort through the evidence and the community pushes for transparency, one thing remains clear. The victims and their families deserve truth, accountability, and real change. That's what we're saying here about Camp Mystic and the fact that this was preventable. Now, I'm so glad to know that the court stopped them from I'm glad that the evidence is preserved. Yes, you can work around there, but you can't disturb that area. I wish they could find the one little girl that's still missing. She's still missing. So that's another problem with this. Is like after this disaster, yes, they held camp last summer. Yeah, they had another session of camp last summer. I hope nobody. How could you send anybody into that river knowing one of these children was still missing from the year before? How could you do that? I understand it's a business. I understand they have to keep operating. I know all that. But it's just such a horrific situation. It is, and these families. Oh my gosh, can you imagine? No, I can't imagine. Not at all. Of course. Hang on a minute. I need to look up one other thing while we talk about this. We all have plans for this weekend. It's going to be so beautiful. South by Southwest starts in Austin this weekend. And so if you're a South by Southwest fan, come on down. Spring break is next week here. Which is always a fun time. There's a lot of people leave for spring break, so it's not as much traffic. All right, here we go. Let me pull this up over here. So the actual story today is this is March. A Texas judge in March 2026 ordered Camp Mystic to halt construction and renovations on its Guadalupe River campuses following a lawsuit by the victims' families, effectively freezing development on the site. Okay, this temporary injunction requires the preservations of the cabins as they were, the grounds as they were, and the buildings for evidence. So this is District Judge Maya Guerra Gamble ordered the halt in response to concerns that modifying the flood damaged area would destroy evidence necessary for wrongful death lawsuits, because it is wrongful death, you know. The routing specifically stops work on the Guadalupe campus, including the office, recreation hall, and the commissary areas where the casualties occurred. The targeted injunction, the court did not stop construction at the nearby separate Cypress Lake campus. They can do whatever they want over there for reopening, but they cannot work on the area where the children died on the Guadalupe campus. It's the Cypress or the Guadalupe. The Guadalupe campus is halted to protect the evidence. So just think about that. I just want to always say, thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I hope you learned a little bit from it. I mean, it's a little short that I want to talk about today. Thank you for caring about this case and for supporting independent coverage that refuses to look away. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure you can subscribe if you want to. You don't have to. It's up to you. I always ask people to please hit that thumbs up. Please subscribe and share. It helps the channel. I'm working really hard at trying to get this channel monetized. It's been over a year. Yes, I know. Wild, right? Anyway, this case is important to me because I do think that it did not need to happen. And clearly the owner knew that there was problems there, and he has said himself he tried to make some kind of changes, but the problem was there's not a warning system available for somebody to purchase for this that they basically could afford, I guess. It all boils down to money. It's like everything else in life. It all boils down to the money, doesn't it? So, that's really all I wanted to talk about today. I'm going to keep following these updates, and we'll keep talking about this. And I'm trying to get some of the information through FOIAs about the lawsuits, etc., that the families have filed. I think it's important to stay on top of this because we want to make sure that this doesn't happen again, right? We want to make sure that there are procedures in place for families who send their children to camp. They want their children to come back home to them, right? So that's important. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. I think Sprinkle and I may come on later on something. I'm working on another show about Gypsy Rose Blanchard, and I'm telling you, the girl has no awareness of self. I don't know how she's showing her face anywhere, knowing what we've learned from these FOIAs, especially about the toothbrush incident. Are you kidding me? Wow, Anyway, we'll talk to you later. You guys have a good afternoon. Thank you for stopping by. And as always, go hug your babies. Life is short, and our time with them is even shorter. Being an empty nester is the hardest thing I've done. I'll be honest with you. I'm still not used to it. But anyway, have a good afternoon. I'll see you later. Thanks, guys. Bye.